Give us 60 minutes and we'll give you Nelson Radio every Saturday from 2 to 3 p.m. on KTLK AM 1150. With 29 years in the mortgage business and an array of top-level guests visiting the show, Nelson is in a unique position to bring you cutting-edge information on real estate, business, finance, and law. If you have any questions for Nelson or any of his guests, give him a call at 888-888-2136. That's 888-888-2136. Or check him out online at nelsonradio.com.
Nelson Radio.
Welcome back to Nelson Radio as we broadcast remote from the Hollyhock House, Frank Lloyd Wright's very first home that he designed and built here in the Los Angeles area. We're with Brett Miller and Gerard Bizignano from Peninsula Sotheby's, and I want to welcome into our program in our Coach's Corner, as we've been talking about legacy, Michael Rotondi from SCI-Arc, founding member and trustee. Michael, welcome to the program.
Good morning.
So we want to ask you, we've been looking at all the features here, but give us your impression of this home and how it impacted you.
Well, it impacted me in ways that I really wasn't fully aware, because I played up on top of that hill, as it was called Olive Hill. I played there as a child. There was a playground that surrounded the Hollyhock House, and before the Hollyhock House had been restored, it was fenced, but you could still get into it. We knew how to go inside, and I think it just triggered our imagination in ways that very few other buildings did. Frank Lloyd Wright brought to Los Angeles sort of a quality and a depth of intellect, and placed it in architecture at a time when Los Angeles was in its first phase of coming of age.
At one juncture, Frank Lloyd Wright was dismissed from the project or left the project, and Schindler came in and began to have his influence, and then later Frank Lloyd Wright, coming back to the project, removed a lot of what Schindler had completed. And it, to me, strikes as, who's going to sign this painting kind of conflict. Was it that way?
Probably, because Frank Lloyd Wright had a very sort of superior position in the way he saw himself in the world, which wasn't too different than other titans of any industry. I would think that instead of that, Schindler would have taken things off the building, being a hardcore modernist, and Wright would have put things back on. I mean, what was really the odd thing about the house, coming out of the period that it did, was Wright was really quite literal in the detail. There was hollyhock vegetation all over the site, and so he puts that as a motif on the building. The same thing with the hollyhock. Wright had, he had a great attachment to symbolism, but most of the time the symbolism was buried in the geometry. In this case, it was very literal. The other thing about the house, which was unusual for Wright, with all of the prairie houses, which were very, very light, and the lightness of the house was a sort of a conceptual predisposition where he had this bigger idea about economy of means. It also made sense in terms of the space from the outside flowing into the house and back to the outside again, so that you were protected on the inside, but you felt connected to the outside. And I think that was a whole ethos that began to emerge when we started to have a different idea about our relationship to nature. And then the Hollyhock House comes along, and you're definitely that the house is very heavy, and it sits on the site in a very wonderful way, but it feels like you're inside the house looking to the outside.
Jeff Hurd, curator, made an interesting comment in this about this home yesterday. He said, most of Wright's homes blend into the landscape. This was one where the home actually dominated the landscape.
That was unusual for Wright, because one of the main things that he believed was that you don't build on top of the hill, you build just off the top of the hill, which when you look at the ancient traditions, Feng Shui, for instance, when you build on top of a hill, it's the fact that people actually get sicker more often, and it's not because of some hocus pocus. It has to do with that's the place that gets the most direct wind. and so you have the most extreme weather up on top.
Michael, let me ask you this question. As a distinguished faculty member of SciArc, a trustee, obviously you've developed your own legacy, your own signature to your architecture. How has Wright impacted you in the context, now the fast forward, in your work you're doing now?
Wright was a great discovery for us because we were told not to look at Wright. Most of the teachers that we had were of the European mind, that modernism was defined by way of Europe. Being born and raised in Los Angeles, we were all fortunate, I believe, that the umbilical cord of Europe never made it over the Rocky Mountains.
Michael, we had a unique experience. We were allowed to go up to the terrace which is not open to the public, and we actually spent a good time up there and looking at the view from the top of this beautiful home on Olive Hill. There was something magical about that moment, being up there thinking that this is the roof terrace that Frank Lloyd Wright would look out from, the perspective he had as he started to maybe assemble the home in his mind.
Well, and Jeff said himself, Jeff Herr, the curator, said that the roof terrace is where he goes to let his mind settle and to get quiet. And in that meditation theme and that spiritual theme, I was thinking while you were talking, Michael, on how I've been coached to be quiet enough to hear the whispers of God, and there you're inspired.
Going up to the rooftop, when Wright walked around the site, he lived with the site, and that was a very unique thing. He lived with the site. He knew all of the different aspects of the site, and he knew that if he were to stand someplace where everything came together, where the epicenter would be, that epicenter then was just raised up off the ground and becomes a place on the rooftop that you can stand. And from that particular spot, you can feel where the site comes to rest, so to speak, but then you can also see the relationship of the site to the city around. And then your mind starts tripping.
This segment, unfortunately, needs to come to rest, but I do so appreciate your time. Michael Rotondi, trustee, distinguished faculty member, and founding member of SciArc. And as we broadcast from the Hollyhock home, one of Frank Lloyd Wright's greats and the first here in California, with my co-host Brett Miller and Gerard Bizignano from Peninsula Sotheby's, a tremendous thank you for joining us in Coach's Corner.
Thank you for doing this. This is a great public service.
Gerard, sorry to cut you off there, but we do have to conclude this show, and it's very, very insightful to have that perspective of what architects are thinking as they go through the design and the vision and the focus that it takes to create these properties. We're at Frank Lloyd Wright's Hollyhock House, broadcasting remote